Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis. I'm a marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor trained in trauma and addiction. The Asking Why podcast is for anyone on a journey of healing and restoration. If you are searching for answers to life's questions and want to learn more about root causes from a psychological and theological mix, this show is for you. In this podcast, myself and a co-host from Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness will interview guests on a wide range of topics in order to get down to the heart of the problems facing our world and understand why things happen and how to change the world and ourselves for the better. Want to learn more tips and tricks to living a healthy lifestyle? Visit us at Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to meet our staff or book a speaker, go to clintdaviscounseling.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe today. Putman Restoration is a proud sponsor of the Asking Why podcast. Putman Restoration specializes in commercial disaster services, including water damage, fire, smoke, mold, and storm. Their goal and desire is to get your properties up and running as soon as possible after disaster strikes. Hospitals, schools, hotels, and large municipal buildings. Malls, churches, and large commercial properties are their specialty. Managed properties nationwide? No problem. Putman Restoration services their clients nationwide. They are strategically partnered with elite restoration companies throughout the U.S. and Canada, giving their clients resources during disasters where normal companies would be tapped out. Trust the professionals at Putman Restoration when disaster strikes. Visit them online at www.putmanrestoration.com or give them a call at 318-453-5029. Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and I have with me Brandy Walker again. She's been on here a few times now. You might be the most recurring therapist I have coming on here. Fourth time. So this is episode 74, and we're going to be talking about dating after a breakup, divorce, or a loss. So Brandy and me have been talking and emailing back and forth some good topics, and this one seemed to be one that we haven't covered, and I think we're dealing with a lot with clients. We're constantly working with people, or we've had these personal experiences. I know you have had some of that yourself. So welcome back, Brandy. Tell people who maybe haven't, this is their first time listening to you or us, who you are and what you do. And yeah.
Okay. Hello. I'm Brandy Walker. I am a counselor here at Clint Davis Counseling. I've been here for 3 years in July, so a little over 3 years. Been a counselor for 14 years. 6 of that was inpatient, so I don't know if you can really count that as counseling. It is, but it's more crisis intervention.
Yeah, triage.
Yes. I see clients that present with all types of things, but I do a lot of grief and trauma work. That's typically where everyone ends up, even if it hasn't been a loss like death. There's still lots of grief to process for just life events. So that's kind of my primary focus, or what ends up coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where you're at. Yeah.
That's a little bit about me.
Talk a little bit about, you've talked, or I can, you've come on before and we've talked about grief and loss, and we talked a little bit about your previous relationship. Can you talk just to touch on that?
So I was in a relationship for approximately 20 years, on and off, but 20 years. And after 7 years of consistently being together, he was an alcoholic, and he died on our living room floor while I was doing CPR. And that was, in that year, 4 significant family members died. 3 of them in 3 months, 2 of them in 24 hours. It was a very, very difficult year. So I was submerged in the world of grief and had not really dealt with significant grief in the sense of death since I had been a kid.
Right.
So had no clue how you were supposed to, just go on living and get back to life and do all the things you're supposed to do when everything about your world changed.
Yeah.
So I did significant counseling myself. Yeah, I did all the work that anybody told me to do because it was very unpleasant.
Yeah.
And so I've always had a soft spot for grief, but then I became very passionate about it. after going through it that many times in 1 year.
Yeah. Well, I think what's beautiful about your story, Brandy, and if you haven't listened to the other episodes, go back and listen to them, guys. But it's just when we talk about as Christians, that it's by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. We say those things, but I think to be an encouragement to people that are out there that maybe have had loss or have had grief or who have had a divorce or a breakup or whatever, God has obviously used that for your good and shaping you. And that doesn't mean it was easy. That doesn't mean that he caused it to make you more mature.
Right.
But, I always say God has two options. Something bad can happen and tragic that's outside of our control and outside of his will, let's say. He would will us to be in harmony and in peace with each other. But we have free will, and so things happen. And he can either do nothing with it and let it be devastating, or he can make good out of it for you, for him, for the world. And so I think it's awesome to hear your stories and to see how, I brought you on not knowing some of that. Knew a general, details about it, but, getting to know you over the years and see how you do work and hear from your clients how amazing you are. I'm not saying it makes it worth it, but.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. No, God truly did use it.
Yeah.
In a way that, not saying he couldn't have used something else, but I don't know that I would have the same perspective on life, the same relationship with God, see God the same, had God not taken me through that process.
Yeah, and that's and we're talking about it lightly because that's not the whole discussion, so I don't want to gloss over this for people because, I think it's important for people to see. A lot of people are suffering right now, maybe listening and maybe going, why am I going through this and why is this happening? And what we're not saying is suck it up because it's going to be good.
Right.
It's going to stink really badly for a long time. For
a good many years, I had that same thought. Like, what was the point?
Yeah.
Like, God isn't in this. But there came a point when he shifted things and it began to change inside me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we start to externalize the problems, right? And go, okay, this isn't about me. It happened to me. I experienced it, but it doesn't define my worth and my value. It doesn't define my future security. It doesn't guarantee that bad things are going to happen in the future.
Right.
And we start to have hope again and believe that, okay, we can do things differently. And for you, that's turned into holding hope for other people. And I think your story and your testimony that you've shared on here already and that you're going to share today, right? We hope that it's encouraging to people because it's transparent, it's authentic, and it's real. And I think so much of TikTok Reels and Instagram and all these things are great. It's good information, but a lot of times it can just be superficial fluff and, here's what to do. Here's how to change your behavior. And it's not that black and white. It's not that easy.
Right.
And so for y'all that are out there struggling with these things and walking through them, we hope that this episode is helpful. So what are some unusual things about dating after, breakup, divorce, loss? What are some things that you think right off the top of your head that might be validating to some people that they need to know are normal, not healthy maybe,
right,
but are common?
Well, I think each is kind of individual.
Absolutely.
So sometimes what you experience after, let me think this through. Okay. Yeah. It's kind of like you want to allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, but not try to rush to make things feel the same that they did prior to the breakup, divorce, or loss. Right. I don't know if I'm saying that in the right way.
So I see a lot of people they're like, how can I get back to what it was before this event?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So sometimes people want to they don't want to go through the feeling that they're feeling, so they want to start getting back into the dating world right then and there. Mm-hmm. And that can look very different because it's not going to feel the same, even though you're looking to try to get the same feelings.
Right. So you're doing the same behavior. You're dating. You're in a relationship, but it's not going to be the same as it was previously.
Right.
And people want to skip past the process of grief, the process of unpacking what was that relationship, what was good and bad about it, to get to the contentment of the routine.
Right.
Yeah.
And depending on how long you were with someone, dating could have changed significantly.
Yeah.
The way you go about dating. If you'd been in a relationship 20, 30, 15, whatever, the way you met someone is probably not going to be the same way you meet someone in today's climate.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of things shift that you don't really know has shifted until you are in that space to try to navigate that.
Yeah. So give me some examples. Or maybe how is that for you?
Today, it seems that the only way you can meet people is through online dating, and that is the craziest thing. Okay, that's probably not true. You can meet people in other ways, but that's kind of the big platform.
Yeah.
It's very impersonal. It's very surface. Takes way more time than meeting someone like just authentically and having a conversation somewhere. But in our climate today, we don't so much as technology that people are moving away from even trying to meet people in a face-to-face way. So that is what I have come across.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's interesting if you dated, because of the time we live in, if you dated, let's say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, a lot of that looks very similar. Mm-hmm. How our grandparents dated and how our parents dated was very similar. Mm-hmm. How maybe even we dated in high school and our parents dated was very similar. Mm-hmm. But let's say you were in a marriage for the last decade, right? Mm-hmm. And then the phone comes online and the online comes online. And, and even in the last 5 to 7 years, we talk about this a lot when it comes to technology and parenting, all those kind of things. But really, if you think about it in the dating world and put it in context of what people are experiencing post and pre-cell phone and social media, it's an entirely different world than ever before in history.
Absolutely.
And a lot of us, we call it analog to digital converts. It's the same way in the dating world. You were analog where you had a dad tell me they pulled up for homecoming last week or week before. And he said, they're sitting in the car and he's like, "What are you doing?" And the son's like, "Well, I'm about to text her and tell her to come out." He's like, "Get out of the car and go up to the door." And he's like, "No, we don't do that. Like, we don't go to the door. I'd have to meet her parents."
Right.
And I'm like, that's insanity.
Right.
Like, that was one of the biggest maturely developing things that homecoming brought about there's a bunch of toxic things, but one of the things is you go and you meet the parents and you take pictures together and you all stand outside awkwardly on somebody's staircase and, or whatever, right. And the parents joke and you awkwardly do this. And now it's, I'm going to text her from the car to come in, and that's teenagers. But I've seen that evolve to the adults as well.
It's very much in the adult world. And, of course, there's always, people can go to bars and meet people, but there's still the same connotation that there's kind of always been there. That's not necessarily the
best
option. And sadly, I think once you reach a certain age in the church, it becomes very hard when you're in the single category to make connections because lots of things are catered to families, widows, older people. So I think there comes a point when that's not an option. Yeah. Because there's people that are like-minded, same age, and the same scenarios aren't in the same place.
Yeah. And if you are there, then it becomes like a kind of dating factory in church too.
Right.
It's like, oh, who's the other 4 single adults here? You guys need to, meet.
Right. So it can be an awkward space to navigate through.
Yeah, I bet it is.
Especially when you're dealing with breakup, divorce, loss, you are dealing with all of these feelings, all of these inadequacies about yourself, insecurities. You're trying to adjust to what has changed in your life or what's going on. And at the same time, I mean, of course it's individual, but wanting to, feeling sometimes those societal pressures of I'm supposed to be a couple, or I have to be in this, or what does it mean if I'm not? There's lots of things that I think come up that people don't really know how to navigate through.
Yeah, I think that's the importance of coming in and working on stuff before moving too fast.
Yes.
Is that your identity shifts when you're in a couple, right?
Yes.
And let's, a lot of times it may be really unhealthy. And so that's another thing.
Yes.
You got to unpack all the unhealth that was in there. And when there's, would you say, I see it in clients when there's grief and loss, or a breakup, two things happen. Either we make that relationship amazing and it was perfect, and we make it this daydream, especially around grief sometimes. And we're not honest about how messy and broken and dirty it was. Or we have to hate everything about it so that we can move on. Would you say you see that spectrum?
Yes. And yeah, I actually think that a lot of times in the beginning of grief, well, grief from death, that all we can see is the good until we've processed enough that we can face the bad. Because when we lose something, we want the time we invested in something
to matter.
Yeah. And when we lose someone, whether it's been healthy or unhealthy, sometimes we can't take on all that bad stuff at the same time we're trying to deal with the loss itself.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, we do want it to matter. And so it's like, if I'm honest about XYZ,
right,
then it kind of whitewashes everything, or it overlaps everything.
Right.
Yeah, we call that overgeneralizing, right? People, when we're trying to survive a really intense emotional situation, we have these cognitive things that we do, cognitive distortions that we use to, all or nothing thinking, overgeneralizing. We see a lot of that come up in grief and loss and dating after. Yeah, I think what I see in clients is that need to go back to what's comfortable. And I'm used to 2 coffee cups. I'm used to these things. And so I want to get back to that.
Right.
And there's a process of like, I've got to shift. Maybe that's the goal. Maybe I want to date. Maybe I want to be in this relationship. And those things are amazing. And they were amazing. But I have to, again, find my identity as a single person, again, and then bring that person who was married or was in a relationship or was in a deep, abusive relationship or whatever. Who is that person? When you get out of that relationship, you gotta figure out who that person is and recover and heal from whatever it is, so that then you can bring that new person into the relationship, because you're not the same person as you were in the previous one.
Right. And if you don't allow yourself to see that, dating can be disastrous.
So what are some ways that you've seen it be disastrous with clients or with yourself or whatever?
Well, oh gosh, I've seen people who don't process their grief. They move right on into another relationship, and all the hurt from the previous relationship, not just the loss, but the bad things that happened, come with them into that relationship in a way that they can't get to a place of even seeing good things, because they're relating everything based on their past experience. I've seen people go from person to person to person to person looking for the same feeling, the same connection, when you're never going to have the same connection.
Right.
Because it's a different person. It's different personalities, different people, different... I've seen people go the totally opposite way, and they shut down and never open up to anyone again. Those are some of the ways I see it. Yeah,
those are some typical things that I see that are major problems when you don't process the loss and the grief. And I think the same thing with a breakup, though. We're talking about if somebody dies, or if there's a divorce. There's all kinds of different ways, like you were saying in the beginning. We'd have to take each one of those, and kind of go, they're all different the
Right.
way you're going to play after these things. I think we're trying to give a general understanding today. But with divorce, I think it's really important to process why and when and all those kind of things. Because what I see with divorce clients or parents or, the kids is that, in order to divorce, you can't really like the person. We see these celebrities that are like, we ended, our relationship. We love each other. They're an amazing person. We've just decided to go our separate ways. And I'm immediately like, brr, 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 like red flag. Like that's not a thing.
Right, right.
You have to, you're ending a relationship. Everything's great and you love them and it's all fine. You just couldn't pick which side of the bed to sleep on or which, you know what I mean? Like it's.
Right. Yeah.
You got to kind of hate them.
And definitely I think with divorce you deal with those components of whose fault is it, failure, what did I do wrong, which can be different when it's death. And breakups, you get some of the same things because we want it to be something that we can figure out why it happened.
Yep. And not replicate it. Yeah, we have to figure out who's right, who's wrong. And unfortunately with divorce, you go into custody issues and you go into litigation, you go into all these things. And if you don't do mediation and you get a lawyer, then 100% it's going to go who's right, who's wrong.
Right.
And that's only going to cause, chaos. I don't see anything outside of mediation go very well because you have to put somebody in the category. Your lawyer is going to put them in the category of,
right.
Let me prove why they're the problem and they're the fault is on them more than me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do you end that and then like the person afterwards?
Right.
I'm not saying it can't happen.
No. I think there's just a lot of negative stuff that you have to wade through any of those things.
Yeah. With divorce, I think as well, when you go into, if you don't deal with that, if you don't get into therapy and work through it, then you get into this next marriage and you talk badly about the other partner. Right. What are some of those things that you've seen that are kind of toxic?
Talk badly about the other partner, but never see your role in why things went wrong. So you're most likely going to repeat the same things. I have seen people who've been married multiple times and they can't see that they're repeating the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah.
And that's its own hurt in itself that they're doing to themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think people can get into a victim mindset. Bad things always happen to me. It's bound to repeat itself. But it's because they don't reposition themselves to look at things differently, pick differently.
Talk about that for a minute.
That's another one because sometimes what we pick when we're in certain seasons of life may be different than what we would pick. Like what I chose when I was 22 would not be what I choose now.
Right.
I'm in a completely different place.
And that's not good or bad, right? I think
No.
making preferences, moral judgments is what gets people into trouble.
Right.
When we're judging ourselves because we're now 35.
Right.
And we don't like the same things or we're not willing to deal with the same things that we were at 22.
Right. Yeah, so, and I can't think of the exact quote, but it's like a lot of times where we are in our own health or unhealth is what we're going to gravitate to. Like it's going to be a really, really healthy person usually isn't going to be, let me rephrase that. A really, really unhealthy person isn't usually going to attract a really, really healthy person that has good boundaries and their head on straight, so
Absolutely.
to speak. So you're going to get, there may be some levels of difference.
It's a spectrum.
But you're going to kind of be equally have things going on that you haven't figured out.
Yeah, I
that
think
come together.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I know what you're trying to do is avoid like shaming someone or make them feel like it's their fault. That's not what, we're saying. We're trying to talk about the nuances of all this stuff. And here's the deal. None of us come to marriage perfect. None of us come to marriage fully aware of all of our issues and our family trauma and our perspectives and, our sexual preferences and all these kind of things. And then all of those things, even in a marriage where you stay married, change.
Yes.
You have a kid, you have 2 kids, 3 kids, life changes, you change jobs, you gain weight, you lose weight, you get sick. I mean, everything is constantly changing from what you thought you liked and what you didn't like.
Right.
And so that happens when you stay together.
It does. Yeah.
It's going to happen, 5 times that when you break up and change relationships over and over. And so what you're trying to point to, and I think we're trying to point to, is if you're on the other side of one of these situations, divorce, loss, breakup, you can't do anything about what the other person did or didn't do. You can go to therapy and you can talk to friends and you can talk to your pastor and you can figure out what was real and what wasn't. What was their responsibility? What was your responsibility? And then what did I do to play into the toxicity of the relationship? It's not your fault that other people are unhealthy and toxic or abusive, especially. But like you're saying, if the more aware you are of your own ability to set boundaries, to communicate effectively, to use support, to say no, to ask for what you need, the more you build those skills up, the less likely a really toxic person is going to trick you.
Yes, right. And especially, too, if you have been in even more than one relationship that have a lot of similarities in how you are responding to the other person, then it's making sure you look at what is the unhealth or the toxicity bringing it out in you that you can't let go of. Like the codependent stuff, people pleasing, not having the right boundaries, like the stuff that when we're blaming and finding the fault, making sure we're looking at what is it about our personality or our character or the way we're thinking, our belief system, that is perpetuating, picking people that have certain issues.
Or missing the red flags that are there in the first place. Yeah.
That too.
Because a lot of times, let's say you've been in 4 different relationships and everybody cheated on you.
Yes.
Well, it could be that you just got in 4 different relationships and that has nothing to do with you.
True.
However, if you roll the dice on that, most likely there's going to be some attachment, there's going to be some brokenness, there's going to be some pursuit, there's going to be some withdrawal, there's going to be something emotionally going on that allowed for those consistent things to happen. There are patterns, right?
Yes.
One time is not a pattern.
Right.
But over and over again, there's a consistent pattern.
Right.
That doesn't make you responsible for it.
Right.
That doesn't mean you deserved it or you caused it, but it means after those relationships, we have to stop and recalibrate and regroup and go, let me do some deep work on me so that when I go into the next relationship, I'm really understanding why that person cheated.
Yes.
But I think so many people jump from relationship to relationship after these 3 scenarios and don't do any of the work or do very little work. And then these patterns emerge. At least that's what I see in the office. Would you say the same way?
Yes, absolutely. I think people, they come in wanting to know, what is it I'm doing that I keep picking people who do this or do this or do this. But when we try to start getting into it, it can get deep and hurtful, and they have to change. And sometimes
we don't want to.
They don't. Yeah, it's harder, or intellectually they feel like they've got it figured out, but emotionally they don't.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I would think that's too, to put some blame on therapy, I think in today's world, therapy is very intellectual sometimes.
It can be.
So, it's a lot of knowledge without a lot of experience. And, we work hard here to help people do safe relationships with us. And then by pushing them into practice safe relationships outside, experience, hey, what did you feel when they said that? What did you feel when they didn't open the door? What did you feel? How is that similar to the last time? And let's get in our body and let's do some work so that our protective mechanism is better. That we're more aware of how similar this is to the other thing.
Right. Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, to challenge therapists that may be listening, doing handouts and, practice and all this kind of role plays and all this kind of things are good, but we have to be mindful about the experiential is what's so important to getting them in their body and really seeing, did this stuff start before you even dated? Because a lot of times it's,
Right. Yeah.
go with that.
Well, I think, yeah, you just brought up a really good point, because I think a lot of things, the people we choose, how we interact in relationships definitely started before we dated, before we ever, so if we don't get into that work, then how can we change how we're relating to people, how we're reading people, how we're conducting ourselves?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we assume that we can just move forward and not do the work. But it's like, if you grew up as a kid, if you're listening, ask yourself this. When you grew up as a kid, did anybody teach you about dating? Did you actually see, now that you're an adult, or maybe you're in your second marriage or third, or somebody's, passed away or divorced, whatever. Do you know what a healthy relationship even looks like? What's a healthy relationship for you? What makes your body feel safe and healthy and in its most, open and vulnerable form in relationships? And unless our parents modeled that for us,
Right.
or taught us that, we have to learn it.
Right.
And it doesn't just come out of, it doesn't just come out because you're in a relationship.
Right.
I mean, you can work on a relationship and get it that way, but it's going to be really difficult. And I think literally that's what marriage is.
Right. Right.
And I think many of us go into it thinking, this, it's going to start hot and heavy and amazing, and it should stay like that for however long, and it just doesn't.
Right. And a lot of the examples we have, no matter what time period you look at, is TV. And even when you watch older films or things that show how they did it in the old times,
Gone with the Wind.
They didn't even connect.
Yep.
They met each other. You're eligible, let's get married. Didn't even know each other.
Right.
But and then you move in today's time where sex is love. So you don't get to know anyone. You just hop in bed and decide that's the way to go.
Right.
So there's nothing being modeled that comes in our view regularly that teaches you how to work through anything, be in anything, connect with anything.
Yeah.
It's all instant and glorious and magical, and when bad things happen, you either just walk away or have one little conversation and it's all better, which none of that's realistic.
Right. Yeah, we don't have a litmus test to go by.
Yeah.
And many of us don't, and we don't even realize it. We don't really stop and think like, no, these people, they're a healthy marriage. It's like, well, what do you know about them? Well, I see them at church once a week or once a month, and they don't, yell at each other and cuss each other out. So that's my view of marriage.
Yeah.
I remember growing up and, my parents divorced when I was 8, and they had conflict and, step parents and more conflict. And, I was like, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to fight with my spouse, because fighting is bad and causes anxiety and all these things. And then I had this other couple that were, my other friend, one of my friend's parents, and they never fought. There was never any conflict. I was at their house all the time, never saw them fight. And I was like, okay, that's who I'm going to be like, and I will not date a girl or be with a girl until I meet somebody who's like that. Because the worst thing I can end in is divorce. Like the worst situation for my kids, I'll never get a divorce. So I'm going to know 100% that this is going to work before I get married. And,
Right.
And I never had a girlfriend, quote unquote, because of that. And I couldn't commit, and I had anxiety about, I don't want to date this person, and is this going to be perfect? And if we don't agree on everything and have conflict, because in my head I was like, they had it that way.
Right.
So that's attainable. It's attainable to have a relationship where there's no conflict. Well, now as an adult later, it's like, well, they had conflict. They just hid it, and they didn't do it in front of us, and it imploded in and of itself. Like I know now, like it was not a good situation, but that's what we do, right? We don't have healthy people to sit down with us and go, hey, here's how healthy conflict works, and here's what this is supposed to look like. And and so we're just all kind of shooting from the hip and trying to figure it out, and it's a mess.
Yes.
And then you get married and you're like, no, you have to fight. You have to have conflict. That's perfectly fine.
Right.
How you have it is very important.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to this and you haven't even thought of that or dealt with that or processed that or for any length of time, you have to, before you jump into a new relationship, where it's going to be devastating.
Right.
which is why the divorce rate for second marriages, I think something like 70-something% higher. And then for third marriage is like 87% divorce rate. I mean,
Right.
it's like
Right.
impossible.
Yeah. And so another thing about dating after loss is, and we've touched on this, but you're not going to find the same chemistry with someone, and sometimes.
Well, first explain to me what you mean by chemistry.
Well, maybe the connections, maybe the better word. I think it's going to feel different with different people, and sometimes that can make you think something isn't something you should pursue, or it is something you should pursue. I think it's trying to be more aware and present with what you're feeling as you go through that, because I think if you are trying to get the same connection or the same feeling, you're going to be discouraged, put off, think something's wrong when there may not be anything wrong with the connection. I don't know. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
I feel like it's hard to put in words what I'm.
Yeah, no, I think it's, again, you have a previous relationship and maybe it was very emotional, or maybe it was very sexual, or maybe it was very calm.
Right.
And so you're going to try to repeat that pattern and get that in this new relationship, but it's a new person. So they're not calm, or they're not as, sexual, or they're whatever, but they have these other things that are amazing that this other person didn't, which kind of, paints us back into looking at the reality and the authenticity, looking authentically at the old relationship and seeing it for fully what it was. Because if you don't do that, then you go into these new relationships with all these expectations and projections that aren't real. And so maybe your ex-wife was, super sexual or super touchy, and this new woman's not, but maybe she's very affirming in a way that your ex isn't.
Right.
But if you've painted the ex in this beautiful, this either awful person or perfect person, then nobody has a chance.
Right. Right. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a harder thing to navigate sometimes than we want it to be, because there is hurt in it. There is preconceived ideas and pressures, and I think sometimes we want to move forward, and when we try, it feels too overwhelming. Guilt comes up with, probably with divorce too. Divorce, grief from loss.
You're talking about guilt from like moving on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Lots of things come up that sometimes don't make sense. You don't know why you are
shaming
having
yourself,
the emotional reactions that you're having.
Well, if you're not processing it, for sure,
Yes,
right? That's the point.
Right. But even if you are processing it, each step you make towards going on a date or moving closer to someone, you're going to have feelings about until you've sorted through the new with the old.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I've had clients who have lost somebody or had a divorce, and they hate the person, or the person was extremely unhealthy, and that's over. It went well. There's no chaos, and yet they still find themselves feeling guilty for moving on, for going into a new relationship. They feel like they're violating, or having an affair, or because they've been loyal for 25 years.
Yes,
they're used to, hey, I don't look at other men, or I don't look at other women. And, this is the way I do my life, and that's a neuro pathway that's built. And then the relationship's over, but your brain hasn't changed.
Right.
And so you're supposed to then look and glance and see and flirt, and you have no clue how to do that.
Right. And I think that's another part that's important in this is when you're going through this, and no, I'm not saying like first and second dates, like dumping all this stuff, but you have to be able to be with someone that you can talk through what's happening.
That's good.
And them support that and show you patience through that, and you them. Or, I just think that's an important part of it because
it's who you are.
Right, and it's not going to go away quickly.
Yep.
Even though you might want it to.
Yep. Well, you're bringing that to the table. So you can't go into a new relationship after a really bad breakup or after a divorce or after a loss and pretend like that's not who you are.
Right.
So if you're dating someone, the first date you don't dump it, but like at some point they have to know I'm a divorcee or I'm a widow or I'm whatever or widower, and I have an ex-husband who I loved or an ex-wife who I loved, and this is not my plan. This is not how it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to come with me. Mm-hmm. And we have to choose people who are willing to accept that. Yeah. They're not their first love. Right? You're my second choice, technically. Mm-hmm. Now, I can be in love with you, and I can be passionate about you, and I can serve you, but I had this other thing that I would have much rathered. Mm-hmm. And I think the more honest we are about that, the more we can actually connect. Mm-hmm. And it's when we're dishonest about it, and we're like, no, that's over, so now I'm just going to love you as much as I love them. And it's like, that's impossible. Right. You can eventually.
Yeah. Absolutely. Differently. Mm-hmm. Sometimes better.
Yeah.
But if you don't allow yourself to move through it, it's not going to be better.
Right. And if you pick people who you don't hold those expectations to, that's what I would tell people, especially like, it's okay for you to hold people to a standard. Mm-hmm. You know, the new people you're dating, I'm not going to do that again if it was negative. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Or, hey, this is who I am and this is what I bring to the table. Are you willing? Like, let's say it's kids. Mm-hmm. You know, what are some of the things you see when it comes from a divorce situation or a loss where there's kids involved and step parents and
that can get tricky. Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes it depends on the age of the kids and when that other person comes in to become a parental figure, as to how much they really are a parental figure that can actually discipline and do those types of things. I do sometimes see a lot of people get remarried, but the partners still take care of their own individual kids. They don't let it cross over, which can cause conflict with them.
Yep. Or they parent too much. You know, stepmom or stepdad starts trying to come in and give discipline to somebody that they don't know and don't trust, and they think, oh, well, you're just supposed to respect me because I'm an adult, and it's like, right, it ain't gonna go that way.
And sometimes there are situations where step parent focuses more on stepchildren than their children. Like it shifts, trying to make, I couldn't think of the word. Yeah. They're trying to make it blend, which can mess things up. I think there's a lot of ways it can present. Yeah. Sometimes the kids don't want anything to do with the other person and the parent does it anyway. Yeah.
Well, I think that cycles us back to that idea of like, we're plug and playing families. We're going, I had this ended, so now I want to plug and play and have that same thing with these people, and you just can't. Right. It's a different group. It's a different person, different personalities, different styles. And so the goal, I hope that people here today is, no matter what you do after these situations, it's going to be totally different. Yes. And you're going to have to learn who they are and grow in that, and they're going to have to learn who you are and grow in that. It's not going to be instantaneous or overnight. What, if you have had a relationship that maybe you were in love and it was great and then you lost them, how can you ever love again? Like I've heard people ask me that. What would you say to that?
I think, again, that's a healing process. And you have to nothing says you have to love again. But if you are wanting companionship, love in your life, you have to allow yourself to go through whatever it takes to heal you, to be able to even open yourself up in that way.
What does that mean, heal you? So
to be able to, for the hurt of that loss to not be so big that it overpowers everything else.
that's good.
So that you can actually see that connecting isn't bad.
Right. So
isn't.
Yeah.
And that, yes, love hurts. People leave. People pass away. You can't, it's getting to the place of accepting that that is part of reality. You can't love without the possibility of loss. If you cannot accept that, then you don't open yourself up, but that limits your life experience.
And maybe that's worth it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay not to. I think it's how much do you shut yourself down?
Yes.
Because I don't think you can pick and choose. We may think we can, but I don't think we can pick and choose. Like, we can't shut just one type of love out of our life without kind of closing it all down. Because when we shut down, we shut down.
Yep. That's good.
So,
right. So the point is doing it authentically. So if you're going to choose never to date again because the pain of loss is too great, and you can explain that, and you're good with that, and you're at peace with that, that's different than I just don't want to be in pain, so I'm going to avoid everything.
Yes. Yes. And, I mean, I do think a lot of times when, we talked a little bit about people trying to get to that connection quickly, but there are people who, when they lose someone in whatever way, they have to go through a process of processing and imagining the fact that they won't be able to love again because it's raw and it's
yeah, you're gonna feel like that,
right? And it's normal. Both things are actually normal for people to go through and feel. It's just what we do with them.
That's good. Yeah, it's important for people to understand that it's a mess.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, but we pretend we know that. We say it's a mess, but I don't think today we're talking about the messiness of it. And even just talking about it's complicated because we could talk about it for 5 hours. We could literally take each one of these things and talk about it for 2 or 3 and 4 hours. And the goal isn't to answer all the questions today. The goal is to make you mindful about maybe the people in your life who are going through these things and take it easy on them. Maybe if you have somebody who is a girlfriend or a friend who is suffering after a breakup or after a loss, be patient with them. Try to figure it out what it is that they need, and walk with them in that, and not try to project your own desires about what you think they need.
Right.
Because I think kind of what I wanted to wrap up with was, I think one of the things that makes it really hard is like, we're talking about individually and kind of internally how we process, but then you have like family members and friends who are adding to that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, well, yeah, that can go lots of different ways. We're impatient with people's pain, and we want people to get back to the way they were or something more normal. At least that's my experience. I do hear that a lot, that, even with death, with divorce, with loss, after a certain amount of time, people think you just get over it, move on.
Get back out there.
Quit. Or you do move on and they're not okay with you moving on. They don't like who you chose. You moved too quickly. How could you move on to someone else after such and such? So there's lots of...
Oh, yeah. I've seen people who lost a spouse and got married a year later. People are ticked, but are they walking with those people?
No.
Yeah, exactly. And we get to, right? That's the joy of being therapists, is we get to walk through those things. And
right.
and that's the whole point of it being, individual, is that, yeah, in some cases that would be a terrible idea. But if the person's actually getting healthier and processing their emotions and had a good relationship and have great perspective, it might be the best thing ever. And so we can't as friends, as family, as church members, we gotta, know each other well enough to know if whether that's good or not just project our own judgment.
Right. And, again, it's one of those things. There are times that it does not seem good. It does not seem healthy. It seems too fast. And it really works for those people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, too, we have to try to, doesn't mean we have to agree, but support in whatever way we can, no matter what we think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll give a personal story. My sister, she got remarried. And when we first found out about, her husband died of brain cancer 9 years ago, I think. And, we were really close. It was a close relationship. And then, we're almost a decade later, she's getting remarried, and she had known him, Brian. Shout out to you, Brian, if you listen to this. Very short amount of time. So from the outside, it was, oh my gosh, is this smart? You have kids. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Being the older brother, I'm like trying to protect her,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's been the best thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
I was so glad that my concerns were, not true.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the case is, you can present those concerns and you can talk and you can say, I'm looking out for you. I'm going to respect your decision, but man, this might not be a great idea. But at the end of the day, like, I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Was I wrong to ask about those things? No, I was concerned and wanted to know about them, but I was wrong in what I was nervous about,
Mm-hmm.
And I was glad I'm wrong. And now, couldn't be happier with him and with them and all those things. But the point is as a family member or a friend, you just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And, don't let your ego and your pride and your fear get in the way.
Right.
You can ask reasonable questions. You can be concerned. And then if you're the dating, the person, I think you have to have a little grace for your family and your friends as well, right?
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think when you come into a situation where those things have happened, you have to try to be open to the fact that different people are going to see it differently. They're going to feel certain things. You weren't there through that experience, and trying to just and people having those thoughts and feelings doesn't mean they're against you.
Yeah.
It's part of the process.
Yep.
And trying to not take those types of things so personally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, there probably are situations where it is personal, but like, I think people going into relationships after any type of loss, they've got to have some openness and willingness to see the mess,
Mm-hmm.
and understand that that mess isn't always it's not always going to present that way. It's not always going to feel that way.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what we were speaking of earlier. That's part of who you pick and choose to stay with. And if you've been open with them and you've talked through these things, then they're going to be better able to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel bad for the spouses and the other people coming into these situations, especially if it's like grief or loss or divorce. It's like,
right,
your family could have loved that person, and now you're quote unquote replacing them, and not allowing for there to be space for all of that is really inappropriate. When we personalize everything and we go, okay, well, I've made these decisions and I've chosen this person, and so you all have to be okay with it, or that means you don't support me, then that puts everybody in a a failure state. You're going to all screw it up.
Right.
But if we can say, hey, this is going to be messy. I want to hear your opinions. I don't want to hear criticism. It needs to come in a healthy way, but I'll take what you say and I'll hold it and I'll look at it. I'll bring it to my therapist. I'll process it. I'll see what's true about it. And then I'm not going to have to agree with you, and I may not do the decision that you want, but I'll at least respectfully listen and hear, because I know you love me. And also, we're a family. We're a system. And so I think that's what we've lost in American dating, especially, is it's so individualized. It's you do you do what you like. Don't care what anybody else says. Live your life. It's like, well, that's great until your parents are paying for your rent, or that's great until this person has to keep your kids, or that's great until you have, you stay out of my dating life, but please come and support everything that it takes to get it off the ground. And so we can't do that either. And I think I see a lot of that in clients and working them through that and going, okay, yeah, it's not your mom's choice, but at the same time, your mom's been involved in this, supporting you through it the whole time. So she's going to have some impact on how that affects her. And
Right.
so be a little considerate maybe.
And I would add too to that, the person coming in to the situation of loss, it's okay at some point for them to have conversations with people. Sit down with mom, dad, brother, sister, whoever, and talk about what them be open enough to say, I get where y'all are coming from, but you gotta,
Give me some
you gotta
time.
give me a chance. You gotta let me, be willing to have those conversations instead of not just being open to letting the other side feel. You have to interact with that as well.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you can't just shut your emotions off as the partner.
Yeah.
And go, well, I get it. So, because you're going to end up getting resentful and it blowing up in your face later.
Right.
That's good. Any closing thoughts on just kind of what you would want anybody to know if they're in this position? Anything we missed?
No, I think it's something that is challenging to navigate, knowing that it's after you've experienced loss, that it's not going to be like it was the first time you dated somebody. There's stuff there now that you have to process and work through to make relationships what they need to be.
Definitely. Yeah, I would say, to close, just if you're out there listening to this, I know it's not simple. And what we're trying to get to is the why it's not simple. And it's not simple because your beliefs shape your thoughts and feelings, which shape your actions. And what you believe about God, you believe about other people, you believe about yourself is shaping everything that you think. And in relationship, we build those beliefs in that relationship. And it's supposed to be that they don't die and they don't end and there's not divorce and there's not loss and you stay in this safe reciprocal net that builds over 40 or 50 years. But because we live on earth, like that doesn't happen, whether it's divorce or death or sickness or, breakup or whatever. And so if you're entering another relationship, that's always not how it's supposed to be. But again, the encouragement is neither is any of our relationships because we live in a fallen world.
Right.
And so none of our relationships are how they're supposed to be. And that's why we have hope in Christ. That's why we have hope in his return, is that one day he's going to restore all of this mess and we're going to have connection and empathy and all of those things and love in the way that it's supposed to be. And our job is to try to bring into our marriages, into our relationships, a little glimpse of the kingdom. But as Christians, especially, if we're not seeking that kingdom first in our relationships and we're not really growing in our identity in Christ after a breakup, after grief, after loss, if we're still angry at God, if we're still processing all of these identity things, and then we're trying to move that broken, not perfect, but not known identity into a new relationship, it's a mess. And so I challenge people that are listening that if you're in relationships with somebody and it's already a dumpster fire, it's already more difficult or more complicated than it should be, do some individual work. Come in and talk and process and figure out how you're bringing your old self or your old stuff into the relationship and maybe how that's triggering in them their old stuff. And also, be willing to learn about their old mess, because we could talk about that forever, but the person that you're going into has their whole history and their mess and their family, and they may seem like the perfect partner right now, but while you're dating, that's not marriage. And so once you get in that new marriage and that new relationship, everything changes and they're not the person you thought they were and blah, blah, blah. And it just becomes a mess. Right. So do your work, get help. And we wish you the best. Brandy, thanks for always doing a great job and coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. God bless you guys and have a good week.